Up next, we have a panel on leveraging the payment revolution, digital strategies for expanding prosperity and inclusion. Please welcome our esteemed panelists, Penny Burt, Head of Public Policy and Government Affairs, APAC at Stripe, and Mr. Rajesh Kumar, India Managing Director and CEO at TransUnion. The discussion will be moderated by Parikshit Luthra, the Delhi Bureau Chief for CNBC TV 18. Anywhere. I hand over the session to you, Parikshit.
All right, thank you so much. We've had very interesting sessions this morning, and there has been a great focus on digital payments, and the Finance Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar, the Deputy RBI Governor, really gave us a sense of how India has pushed the pedal, pressed the pedal when it comes to digital payments, especially during the pandemic. And just for some statistics, you all already know this, but just to set the context for our topic today, leveraging the payments revolution, digital strategies for expanding prosperity and inclusion, 7,422 crore digital payment transactions are recorded in FY22. According to some reports, 40% of all transactions in India are digital, and digital payments will reach $10 trillion in value by 2026. Now, India is increasingly using this different digital payment forms in order to deliver to those at the bottom of the pyramid. So let's understand how India and US can work more closely together when it comes to financial inclusion, when it comes to digital payments, and what more can be done to help companies like Stripe, like TransUnion Sybil, in leveraging the market and leveraging the potential in India as much as possible. Let me introduce our panelists today. We're joined by Penny Burt, Head of Public Policy, Government Relations, Asia Pacific at Stripe. Thank you very much for being with us, Penny. We also have Rajesh Kumar, MD and CEO for India, TransUnion Sybil. Thank you very much, Rajesh, as well. Let's begin with some opening remarks and some context setting. Penny, let me begin with you. How do you see the digital payments growth story in India and potential for companies like yours?
Thank you very much for that. So I think we've heard from our speakers this morning at length about the enormous success of digital payments in India and the rapid acceleration of growth. Before I talk a little bit about that, for those of you who might not be familiar, I really briefly wanted to introduce Stripe, because Stripe is very new in India. Stripe is actually a financial infrastructure platform for business. Millions of companies from some of the world's largest platforms, including Google and Zoom, every time you jump on one of those Zoom calls, to the most ambitious startups and SMEs in the world, use Stripe to accept payments, grow revenue, and accelerate new business opportunities in new markets. Stripe supports 135 different payment methods and currencies globally in 50 locations. And in 2021, we processed around $600 billion worth of transactions. Another way of looking at that is, while we're very new in India, in the US, over 90%, that's 90% of American adults have purchased from a business that uses Stripe. So in India, we're very excited about the potential to be operating, and we just, for which huge thanks to the RBI, have just received a provisional license as a payments aggregator. So just with that background, how do we perceive digital payments and the opportunity here? So as the Deputy Governor explained this morning, it's important to recognize the remarkable speed, scale, and success of digitization of payments in India. India is clearly now a global leader in digital payments. That has happened in such a short space of time. I'm not going to rehearse all of the numbers for you again because you've heard them, but we now know, having moved up from only 2 or 3% of all transactions, or what we call personal consumption transactions being digital, only 7 or 8 years ago, we now have 40% of payments in the country happening on digital platforms. I just want to cut to the chase and say, what is the opportunity here? And make a few really brief points from the Stripe perspective, what we see. How can these digital payments actually drive greater inclusion and prosperity? 3 quick things, and then we can move into the conversation. Number 1, we've heard about financial inclusion this morning. It's worth thinking about the fact that, of course, with acceleration dramatic during the COVID period, we now have nearly 80% of adults globally have access to some kind of financial instrument, whether it is, through a bank, mobile money, or other financial institution. That's up from only 50% just 10 years ago. And in the case of digital payments, we know, according to the World Bank, that 40% of adults who made a digital payment in the last few years made it for the first time during the pandemic. It's extraordinary. In India, 80 million adults made their first digital payment during the COVID pandemic. That has meant a huge expansion in access to the digital economy, including for underserved groups, for people in rural areas, and for women. I'm just going to stop there, and maybe you want to move to some opening remarks from Rajesh.
Right. Lots to think about there, Penny, and let me open it now to Rajesh. Rajesh, yours is a company which has been present in India for decades. Give us your own experience of seeing the digital payments market grow and the opportunity you see there.
Perfect. Thanks, Prashant. Good to be here today. Thank you. Get this closer. Am I audible? Yeah. So thank you, USIBC, for this, to create this forum here. Wonderful to be here. So to come to the question, TransUnion CIBIL has been in India for almost 2 decades now. We're hearing some big numbers on the payment side, always boggles your mind, right? The multiples and the exponential growths. So let me add a few on the consumer lending side. We are all about retail lending and a few interesting numbers there. You'd be interested to know that we've actually been a part of some huge growth story on the retail lending side as follows. Last 10 years, we've seen a 10x growth on the sheer number of inquiries for loans. That reflects the demand from the market. And then when we look at important aspects of financial inclusion, right, the number of young borrowers that the industry has given loans to has grown more than 7x in the last 10 years. The number of women borrowers has grown 6x in the last 10 years. So through all this growth at TransUnion CIBIL, we have been busy participating, creating, and contributing to this growth. And the numbers do look good when you look at the multiples. Having said that, now let's come to the present. We are talking about a young population that's below 35 years of more than 840 million. We are talking about a median age of 29. We are talking about only 190 million credit active individuals, which is less than 15% of our population. And most importantly, when we talk about the kind of growth agenda that we're talking about for India, the credit to GDP ratio, and we all know how important credit is to the growth of GDPs and economies, our credit to GDP ratio is less than 1/4 of the developed countries. So while we're talking about these multiples here, the credit penetration is still very, very low indeed. And one of the reasons I am sitting here on this topic really is to explore along with the payments ecosystem to see how can we use the payments data now. If we could do all that we did at CIBIL with trade line data, credit data from great institutions. Just imagine the potential and the possibilities with payments data, which covers every man's everyday life. And we want to see how we can further the cause of financial inclusion for the country. And all the wonderful agenda that we're talking about in terms of the next 5 years growth story. And when it comes specifically to the role CIBIL can play on financial inclusion using payments data. Maybe we'll deep dive into that in the subsequent questions.
Sure, yeah, sure. As you were speaking, Penny had an intervention.
I just wanted to pick up on that point and say, I think, Rajesh, it's really important for us. I know that people take it for granted, but digital payments fundamentally are a game changer for business generally, but particularly for small business and micro, so MSMEs, because for the first time you actually capture that information. You capture revenues, you capture your tax contribution, and you can use that data to approach people like you and traditional banks and others with a history, a clear record of your business that allows assessment of your creditworthiness and allows you to enter into new agreements, new supplier arrangements, and most importantly, get access to capital and credit. And I think we often sort of gloss over that as being one of the benefits. But, you know, your point is an incredibly well-made one. The greater volume of digital payments, the more companies we have using digital payments, the more opportunity to be developing really sophisticated financial services and new access to capital and growth around that.
Absolutely.
I know we're bored with the numbers already, but let me just point out, you know, we all know the size of the SME sector in India. I mean, SME is the backbone of every single economy in the Asia Pacific. But in India, currently around 65% of SMEs are not connected to the internet.
Absolutely.
So in terms of opportunity, bringing them online is a win-win for everybody.
Absolutely.
That's something we should ask Rajesh. Rajesh, as Penny was also pointing out, there is a large amount of data which has already been created in the system. You can bring out the credit history for people. How do you ensure that these small businesses come under the ambit of the digital payment system? How you can also improve the access to credit for these small businesses as well?
Perfect. I think it's a very important question today from where our economy stands, right? We're talking about more than 8 crore MSMEs in the country. But when we talk about GST, it's only 13 million who are GST registered. So we're talking about less than 20% again who are in the formalized part of the small business world, right? Because they're not even filing GST yet. But to come back to what Penny said and you said, look at it this way. While we are using the word payments, right? I used to be a banker most of my previous life. And I keep thinking payments is too broad a word. It's not really payments. It's really trade, right? Every possible trade as a consumer for us, it's everyday life, everyday purchases. For small businesses, their purchases and payments, it's actually trade. And the reason I love to link these two subjects of payments and credit is that credit is for trade, right? And when you talk about small businesses, it's very obvious that credit and everyday payment is going to be co-mingling, intermingling, etc. For very small businesses, it is going to be difficult to separate the two. So coming back to the core of this discussion, payments data, be it GST linked or UPI linked, I think it's going to be very powerful information. More so, again, given the volume and velocity in these data points, there is just so much happening, right? People are paying less than 100 rupees by paying QR scan code. So coming back to small businesses again, let's also talk about small traders. You can go all in the wall shops and use today. And those guys, again, having been a banker before, my biggest problem in lending credit, in lending to small businesses was unreliable information, right? The financials were outdated. Many a times, financials were not reliable, right? And now what are we talking about suddenly? Formalized economy where people are filing their GSTs or payment is going through the UPI rails, right? There is reliable information, very recent information. And just to sum up this point, let me give you a practical example and not just stop at the possible theory. So at CIBIL, we have actually developed a new product along with SIDBI, and we should be launching it soon. We are calling it the MSME Fit Rank. And I don't want to advertise the product here, but I would love to talk about the concept for a minute because it goes exactly with the theory we spoke about just now. What we're doing really is to take GST data, which is trade data, right? Invoice data, right? We are triangulating that with a bank statement, which is credit and debit data, right? And all of these go where in the end into the financials. That's coming from MCA. So the whole thing is digital. We just need the right consent to pull out this data, and we have a wonderful rank, and there is superb risk differentiation. If you're a lender, that's exactly what you're looking for to lend to small businesses. So I think I'll stop here. A lot of exciting possibilities and potential, really.
Right. And that also makes us think that currently there is a lot being thought about when it comes to regulating the digital payments sector in India on cross-border payments, data privacy law. A lot of parts of the puzzle are being thought about. But if I were to ask you areas where you would like to work with the Indian government and the RBI to leverage this potential better, that question to both you and Penny.
Go first?
You go first.
Sure. Okay. I think, again, from my perspective, since I'm totally focused on the financial inclusion topic, when we talk about regulations or evolving policy, I think there are only two things that come to mind. Again, keeping financial inclusion in mind. We're talking about young Indian population, which is also migrating from small towns into big cities, etc. And then we're talking about small businesses that we just spoke about, right? Through all of this, I think the key really is who's going to and how are we going to create trust between those borrowers and lenders or sellers, and we heard the finance minister talk about ONDC. We're talking about reputation ledgers there again. So to come to your question, it's really about how do we create that trust? And at CIBIL, we've always believed that we want to use information for good. So when we talk about evolving policy, there are only two things that come to my mind. The people like you spoke about small towns, young borrowers, small businesses, they need to represent themselves well. Not unlike how I spoke earlier about outdated financials that nobody believed. If they have to represent themselves well, they have to be able to provide their data to be representing themselves well, be it GST or UPI payments data, right? There's trade data there. So there has to be the enabling ecosystem. The good news, we already have the account aggregator system developing rapidly in India. So we have the rails for a federated consent architecture. If the customer wants to use his own information for good, obviously in a legitimate way, A, and B, data privacy, all of us in this hall know the importance, I won't waste time. So as far as I'm concerned, easy flow of data with the right consent architecture and the right regulations ensuring data privacy, I think those are the only two things that would come to my mind.
Right. Penny.
I think those are two incredibly important things, obviously. Josh, can we just step back and say the RBI is a great regulator to work with, and the Indian government more broadly have been very forward-leaning in pushing innovation, creating competition, and driving growth in the whole digital economy and digital payments in particular. So we're very grateful, actually, for that sort of forward-leaning environment. Some of the ways that we'd actually like to work with the Indian government and the RBI going forward, bearing in mind those comments on data, we're very keen recognizing the speed of innovation, that the government continues to consult and collaborate with industry in a way that allows regulation and policy to keep pace with innovation. And that's tough. I mean, it's tough for all of us because, working as we do in kind of digital-first companies, things move and move really quickly. Secondly, what that means is often taking a principle-based approach to regulation and policy rather than a prescriptive approach on a specific technology. Because if you actually articulate what you're trying to do in terms of safety, security, financial inclusion, there's often more than one way to get there. And if you know what you're doing, then you can slot new technology and innovation in much more quickly. Adopting a digital-first approach, I think, from government by simplifying regulations for the benefit of the whole ecosystem, including, importantly, micro and small businesses and startups is an area that we'd love to be working together. And lastly, working on more public-private partnerships for building public goods and digital infrastructure. So there's lots of really positive forward-leaning things that we think that we can be doing together, but with data and access to data and that whole idea, Rajesh, that you've set out there, using data for good to drive the future of financial inclusion and prosperity.
Right. Interesting points there. I'd like to also ask you, Penny, about how US and India, today we're sitting at US IBC India Idea Summit. The whole focus today is on digital payments, how India and the United States can come up with a digital agreement, standards on cross-border flow of data as well. How can India and US work closely together to ensure financial inclusion?
That's a great question, and I think it's worth saying the US and India already work incredibly closely together on these issues. Many of you might not know, but US business has played a really key role in the early development of India's digital economy. In the very first wave of digital payments, Visa, who we heard from earlier, and MasterCard were some of the early movers in providing access to credit cards and debit. And that was kind of part of the first wave of digital payments. And of course, things now have moved on so fast with the creation of the India Stack, the fabulous UPI, the incredible acceleration through UPI. But it's worth noting that through two big US companies, Google through Google Pay and Walmart through PhonePe, they actually account for a huge volume of transactions on UPI. Now, you know, who knew? But huge drivers of, you know, the volume, the value on the UPI platform. Moving forward, areas where we think that the US and India can collaborate more closely are actually as two democracies keen to build the global internet economy. India and the US can work on building that ecosystem of regulation, policy, standards that supports digital trade. And we have a great opportunity, as we heard this morning, under the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, through India's G20 chairmanship and the work that goes on there in digital infrastructure. And I'm just going to say this, potentially through looking bilaterally at new kinds of agreements in the digital economy.
Right. Thanks for that, Penny. And my final set of questions now, let me begin with Rajesh. Rajesh, when it comes to expanding your footprint in India, the business opportunities that you see, we're talking about big numbers, looking at reports which are talking about digital payments reaching $10 trillion in value by 2026. So where is the potential that you see for your business? How would you like to expand the footprint in India?
Thanks, Parikshit. Yeah, I think it's a very important question, more so in today's context. The reason I say that, if you see the last few years, thanks to the wonderful digital stacks that India has been building, the India Stack as we call it, wonderful phenomenon has been happening. You have the wallet companies who want to set up e-commerce businesses. You have the e-commerce businesses who want to get into lending. Then there are payment companies who say, I need to monetize my business better, and I'm looking for some lending opportunities. So you have these giant companies where lines of businesses are rapidly blurring, right? And everybody has to provide credit for growth, and credit is one area where people make money. So to come back to your question about how do we want to expand our footprint now, go with the earlier theme that lines are blurring in this digital world. What we really want to be focusing on, and it's not just US and India, but across this ecosystem, what we really want to be focusing on is to create the right partnerships, the right alliances, a network of networks, so to say, because as I mentioned earlier, if the payments and credit is going to be heavily commingled, then the future model that we envisage is going to be one where there is a lot of credit going into specified end users from a very everyday perspective. And likewise, lending is all to do with risk management as well. So on one hand, within these rails, you will have specified end-use related credit, and then on the other hand, we can have entrapped cash flows where small deductions are made in the credit. It doesn't have to be that monthly EMI system at all. In the olden days, when checks had to be cleared, it was once a month. This can be married within the cash flows. So this is how we envisage our footprint to go deeper into this digital evolution and revolution in India.
All right.
Yes. Yeah.
We're running out of time. Our final question to Penny. Stripe offers a whole range of digital solutions. What do you see for India that will work for you?
We hope for the long term to be able to bring all sorts of fantastic digital solutions to help Indian business, from the smallest SMEs, who, as I pointed out, really have an opportunity to connect to digital, through to the largest platforms. But going forward, in the immediate future, we're really excited about connecting Indian business to global opportunity. That is really the foundation of the Stripe platform, is creating that cross-border opportunity, connecting to new markets and new opportunity.
Right. Thank you so much, Penny. Thank you so much, Rajesh.
Thanks,
Clearly,
Prashant.
businesses in the US looking for greater clarity when it comes to the digital payments ecosystem in India and setting of standards as well. We leave it there. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Prashant.
Thank you very much to our panelists for that insightful discussion on how the US and India can continue to cooperate to expand financial inclusion. May I request the three of you to please get together for a group photograph? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking out the time to come and talk to us.